We've got something a little bit different for you today. We're trying out a new format, so let us know what you think in the comments. Today we're going to be cooking Plaice and Salmon Paupiettes. Let's get started. So begin by putting your butter in the saucepan, peel a clove of garlic and add that in too. And now we'll add 2 bay leaves, a pinch of black peppercorns, about 10 to 15, and just the stems off of about 4 or 5 sprigs of dill. Next up, we're going to dice about 1/4 of a large onion. You don't need to actually dice this up very finely. Roughly chopping it or slicing it would work just as well. And add about half of that diced onion to your saucepan. Keep the rest because we'll be using it later. Next up, we're going to fillet our flatfish. In this case we're using Plaice, but all flatfish are exactly the same, they just range in size and shape. So to do this, you'll want to use a filleting knife, that is this flexible long thin blade I've got here. And before we actually fillet this, we're going to make 3 cuts, one around the head, one down the length of the spine, and one just across the tail. And we'll do exactly the same on the other side later. So here's the first cut at the tail, just where the flesh ends, and just make sure you get right down to the bone. The next cut I'm going to do is just around the head, again feeling for that flesh to make sure I'm not wasting any, and cutting it right around that head. And the last cut right down that spine, and you'll know where this is because there is a natural line on the Plaice that you can just follow. And now if you just run your finger down that spine cut, you'll be able to feel which side you've gone down, and you can start by taking that fillet off. So run your knife right down and keep following those bones as close as possible so you've got no wastage. You should hear this clicking sound, and that means you're hitting against the bone, and you know that you won't have any fish left on it. Make sure at this point you're doing long sweeping cuts as opposed to short sawing motions, as this will wreck the fillet. Once you get towards the outside fins, you'll see that you've actually released all of the fish from the bone, and you're just left with a bit of skin attaching it, so you can just cut straight through this. You don't need to go all the way to the outside. You may also find it easier to cut the fins off first with some kitchen scissors before you fillet the fish. Now we're going to do exactly the same on the other side, however this time you'll find that this fillet is about 1 inch or 2 shorter than the other fillet, so each Plaice will have a long fillet on each side and a short fillet on each side. Now you need to remove this from the short fillet by just releasing it from the thinner end and pulling up. Now we're just going to turn the fish over and repeat the entire process on the underside. Now we're just going to trim up these fillets because this is going to make it easier to fillet them in a minute. Okay, now we've got all the fillets off of our Plaice, we're going to just trim off all the excess skin, as we're going to be using the bones to make a very simple fish stock to add to our sauce later. So we've taken off all the excess skin, and now we're just going to chop the bones into smaller pieces and discard the head. You can use the head, but it takes a lot of trimming and I don't find it's generally worth it. Okay, so now you can go ahead and add these chopped bones to your saucepan with the other ingredients, and you're going to place this on a low heat just to sweat down for about 10 minutes or until the fish has started to cook and your onions are going translucent. So whilst that's cooking down, we're going to remove the skin from our fillets, and to do this you're going to cut gently straight down, slowly start turning your knife whilst you've got a good grip on the thin end of a fillet, and run your knife down, putting gentle pressure down towards the chopping board to bend your knife, making sure you don't leave any flesh on the skin. And we'll just repeat that process for the other 3 fillets. Once all the skin's removed, we're just going to trim off any discoloured parts of the fish. And now we're ready to roll our paupiettes. So I'm going to roll each of my pieces of Plaice around a piece of salmon. So the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the skin using exactly the same principle as you did for the Plaice. So we're going to make a shallow cut down to the skin, start to turn our knife, pressure down towards the board to flatten out the knife, that's why it's flexible, and cut all the way along, making sure there's as little wastage as possible. Next up, take your salmon fillet and cut some even sized strips from it. Lay out your Plaice fillets, and then you're going to cut a piece of salmon to the same width as your Plaice fillets. Check that the piece of salmon you've cut is as wide as the widest point of your Plaice fillet, and then place on the thin end, that's the tail end, and roll up all the way to the other end, placing seam side down once done. And now just repeat the process for the other 3 fillets. Once they're all done, place in the fridge until needed. Now we're done with raw fish, so a quick clean up. And now our fish bones have sweated down for about 10 minutes, we can just cover them with water. And place back on a low to medium heat for 20 minutes. Make sure this does not boil. Okay, so whilst our fish stock is cooking, we're going to butter a small high-sided dish for cooking our paupiettes in. So butter fairly generously to make sure they don't stick, and then you can place in your paupiettes with a small space in between each one. And to those paupiettes we're going to add our lemon zest and juice, the rest of our onions from earlier, and some white wine. Okay, so our fish stock has now been on for 20 minutes, so we can take that off the heat. Sieve it into our jug. Make sure you press all of that stock out of all the bones and the vegetables. That's where the best flavour is. Now pour enough stock into your dish until it comes about halfway up the paupiettes. And then you're going to cover that with a piece of baking paper. And that goes into the oven for about 12 to 15 minutes. Okay, now these are cooked, we're going to carefully take out our paupiettes and put them onto a warm plate, and make sure you keep the cooking liquid because we're going to add that to the sauce later. Okay, moving on, we're going to make a beetroot puree. So for this you want to start with your cooked beetroots and place them into a food processor. Add to that your butter. And here I'm using a couple of pinches of smoked salt, but you could just use regular salt. Freshly ground black pepper. And then process until smooth. You might need to use a blender for this. Once smooth, add your cream and process again to incorporate. And now we're just going to push this through a sieve to make sure there's no lumps in it. And that's our beetroot puree done. Okay, so this is actually probably what you should start with, as it takes the longest, but I didn't want to start the video by just roasting some sweet potatoes, but place a couple of sweet potatoes on a tray and roast them. So I'm just going to use one sweet potato here because I'm only going to make one portion of this. So peel your sweet potato, place it into your food processor, and just be careful because where the sweet potato attaches to the plant there may be a stringy bit you want to remove. Now add your butter, season, and process until smooth. Now check that your sweet potato is smooth. If you don't have a very good food processor, you may need to pass this through a sieve. Otherwise, you can place this in a piping bag with a star nozzle and keep it warm. Okay, so finally we just need to make a sauce now. So we're going to start by making a roux, which is a mixture of our butter and flour. And we're just going to cook that out for about 3 minutes over a low heat. Now to our roux, we're going to strain out that cooking liquid that we saved earlier. Turn the heat up to medium and reduce this down till about a third of its original volume. Whilst that's happening, we're going to whisk together our egg yolk and cream. This is called a liaison. And we'll add this later. It's not only going to add richness, but it's also going to help to thicken because of the egg yolk in there. So once your sauce is reduced to a third, you're going to slowly pour in your liaison mixture whilst whisking the entire time. You've got to be very careful now not to boil your sauce or it will split. And continue cooking until it becomes very thick. Now my sauce is cooked, I'm just going to take it off the heat and add in the chopped dill and just mix that through. And that's now ready to use. And I've also made up a bit of lemon caviar just to serve on the plate with this. I'll put a link above.